Hey guys, so I am ready to tell my daughter's story. This is probably gonna be pretty long. May have to make a few videos about it, but my daughter went into cardiac arrest in my arms when she was 10 days old. And this is her story. A little bit of a background on everything. Me and my husband struggled with infertility for 3 years. IUIs, hormones, you name it. The only thing that we did not do is IVF. We were actually planning on getting IVF done that next month or that next cycle when we found out I was pregnant with her. In the process of having my oldest, we had 4 miscarriages. So I've got 4 little angel babies watching over us. And during my oldest daughter's pregnancy, I was very sick. I had preeclampsia really bad. My swelling was, I can't even begin to describe how bad it was. It was bad. My skin was bright pink and ripping open. It was oozing. My skin was actually cracking and splitting because there was so much swelling. My doctor said she had never seen anything like it, but my blood pressure was borderline at that point, and I didn't have protein in my urine. Well, I went from 0, well, not really 0 because I had all the freaking swelling, but I went from basically maintaining a stable condition to crashing really, really fast. So they did an emergency induction, and my daughter was born. In the process of her delivery, my labia was actually so swollen and all of my tissue was so swollen, she became stuck in the birth canal and they had to use forceps to get her out. The forceps caused head trauma, but nothing super major, just, a little bit of stuff to the back of her head. So she wound up in the hospital for like 5, maybe 6 days because she was jaundiced. This will make sense later on in the story, but she was actually discharged the next day, the next morning or whatever, after being there for like 24 hours under the bilirubin lights. We went home 12 hours later. The next day she was still lethargic. She was not doing okay. Just something wasn't right. So I called around trying to get into the doctor's office, couldn't do anything, so I pulled strings. I called people at the hospital who we know, charge of the NICU, and they said bring her back in. They did labs on her bilirubin, and her bilirubin was up to 19.6. Once they get to 20, they start having brain damage, so it was, everyone like really freaked out and got her in there, and she was under, the blankets and the overhead lights and everything, had her in front of a window. They were trying to force feed her. So we wound up going back after going home. It'll make sense more later, but yeah, and then we were there for a few more days before she was fine and got discharged. Billy baby, they couldn't get her bilirubin down. She got discharged and everything's great, we're home. A couple months down the road, found out that I'm pregnant with a second child. We did get pregnant naturally with Laney. We did not have to do any fertility treatment, so that was pretty awesome. This is going to be Laney. We had more problems with her pregnancy too. The doctors were aware that I was going to have a lot of preeclampsia, so they pre-medicated me, had me on aspirin and a lot of other blood pressure medications to try to counteract all of the complications that I would have. It definitely made a big difference, but it did not make it go away. I still had issues, and I wound up compensating until I just didn't, and I crashed. I had another emergency C-section at 35, or sorry, I did not have a C-section, emergency induction at 35 weeks. And when she was born, the cord was wrapped around her neck and she was not breathing. They were able to get her breathing, but she was not breathing the way that she was supposed to. So they rushed her off to the NICU. Now, guys, This is in July in the midst of COVID, which means me and my husband are the only ones allowed there. My husband, as he should have, left me and went with my daughter to the NICU. Okay, so I forgot to add, while I was pregnant with Laney and dealing with the preeclampsia, I also have a heart condition called PSVT. My heart goes really fast, and sometimes people need to have be cardioverted, basically medication or electricity used to restart the heart so that it'll slow down. While I think I was 32 weeks pregnant, I went into SVT at the house, and I normally convert on my own. It's no problem. Like, I've never ever in my life before that time had to have medical intervention. But that was not the case while I was pregnant with Laney. I had to go to the hospital and be cardioverted. So with that being said, before we went in for the delivery, I told my husband that if anything happens to me, you stay with her. Like, I will be okay. You choose her over me no matter what. Okay, that is why he went with her. No one, please don't think bad on my husband. It was not, I told him to go. I told him to stay with her because I didn't want her to be alone, no matter what, whether she was perfectly fine or not. You know, when they take the baby to the nursery and do all their weight and all that kind of stuff, I always wanted him to be with her. So, yeah. Prior to becoming a paramedic, I was an assistant on pediatrics in our hospital here that I was actually at. And I got floated to labor and delivery, nursery, NICU, and postpartum, just depending on the patient load that day of my shift. So I knew very well that her being separated and in that room was not good at that point, which was terrifying. The fact that my daughter was so sick, they had her completely separated. They were not letting me breastfeed yet. I wanted to breastfeed immediately because I knew that with my preeclampsia and all the swelling that I had, it was already going to be a struggle to get it in. And the fact that I was induced early, my body was not ready yet. These are all things that just made breastfeeding so much more difficult. We finally got them to let me touch her. I couldn't hold her, but I could touch her while she was in the incubator. And they wound up giving her an OG tube. Basically, it's tube down her mouth into her stomach. So she was not eating at all for a while. But when they removed that, I was able to hold her and try to feed. So they wouldn't let me stay in the NICU and just be with her. So every 3 hours, I had to have someone basically carry me back and forth because my leg was still screwed up to the NICU to try and feed. And I took as long as I freaking possibly could. And then after I was done feeding, I'd go back to the room and breastfeed. Take an hour nap and I'm right back at it. I just noticed this little mistake in here. I did not go back to the room and breastfeed. I went back to the room and pumped, trying to get the breast milk to come in. But anyways, it was just kind of a cycle. Fast forward to 24 hours, the doctor comes into the room. Now, I don't know if you know, but doctors don't come into the room unless there's something wrong. Something very wrong. They'll call a nurse and send the nurse in to give you the results. They don't come in. They just don't. It's not normal. Unless it's just rounds. Anyway, she came in and sat down with us and told us that she had not pooped in 24 hours, which is not normal. So they were going to do x-rays to determine why. And when the x-rays came back, it showed that her intestines were not connected to her rectum, which basically means she literally is full of shit and is not connected at all, and she would possibly need a colostomy bag with major surgery. The hospital that I'm at cannot handle that in any way, shape, or form. So they decided to ship us to Texas Children's. I forgot to add this, but because they were shipping her, I was fighting them to be discharged because technically I was still a patient at that hospital, and because I couldn't walk, they did not want to let me go. But you're not going to ship my child and not take me with you or let me go. Like it's not going to happen. I don't know if anyone knows, but Texas Children's has their own specialty transport crew named the Kangaroo Crew. They are incredible. They are specialized in children and amazing teams over there, whether it's by helicopter, fixed wing, or ambulance. So this doesn't really matter right now for the story, but it will matter later. The Kangaroo Crew had to come from Houston to come and pick her up. We did not allow one of the local ambulances, which is like the service that I work for, to transport her to Texas Children's because of the equipment that they needed. So we had to wait 2 hours for them to get to us before they could even transport her. And also, not really part of that, but they put in another OG tube again before they started transporting because she just wasn't eating right. She was still super lethargic, and they wanted to make sure that they can get all the nutrients and everything that she needs, and there was no air or anything in her stomach from the high pressure oxygen. But because of all the equipment that she was on and needed during transport, I was not able to ride in the ambulance with them. So after they loaded her up and took off, me and my husband hauled butt to our house, which was on the way, and got clothes and everything packed so that we could go to Houston to be with her. Now, on the way there, we find out that because of COVID, one of us is only allowed in the hospital. Only one of us. They won't even let the other one in to see her. And of course, with me wanting to breastfeed and being the mom, I'm the one that stays with her. My husband winds up sleeping in his truck all night long. His truck that night, but we didn't get there until like 3:34. We were only about 5 minutes behind the ambulance, even though we stopped. We drive very fast. But the rest of the days, we had a hotel that was across the street. So we weren't sleeping in our truck the entire time. And my husband was incredible, still running his business, still moving houses and all that kind of stuff. Came back every day. Like drove first thing in the morning to go back to town to handle business, and then as soon as he got off work, came back and brought me dinner, anything that I needed while I was in the hospital, and stayed in that hotel room in case anything happens. He'd be close. So you guys, my husband is incredible. He is so strong, and he did so much for me. I'm very blessed to have him, and he's all mine. Right in the parking lot so he can have updates and know what's going on. And they get her there. We show up, and surgical teams are in and out, rushing, doing evaluations, getting tests done. And they also wind up coming and telling me that she has a rectal malformation, which means her rectum is in the wrong place, and did further examination, found out that it's not her rectum, it is a fistula. It is basically just a hole, like someone drilled a hole into you and left it. So her intestines are connected to nothing, and she'll need surgery for that also. And they're not sure what else they're going to do, so they needed to run more tests. They wound up running more tests and found that her intestines were connected to that fistula. So she was able to poop. They were just like knotted or twisted or something inside that prevented it from coming out, prevented her from being able to poop. And they said something about a plug, basically, which is just thick poop that plugs up her butt. So she was not going to need major surgery now. She would need surgery later on for the rectal malformation. but she was going to be fine. We were talking about discharging ourselves that day, or they were discharging us that day, until lab work came back and they determined that she had a skyrocket of bilirubin. So another Billy baby like my first daughter. Well, I'm like, great, whatever, just stick her under the lights, you know, we'll just stay here a few more days, like whatever we need to do to get her to go home. A quick side note that I should probably mention is that I am still struggling to get around, to walk, because of the nerve damage in my leg, but I don't care. I have to be there with my daughter. I have to find a way to get around. So I wound up clinging to the walls in the hospital, doing anything I can to be able to walk, because I was scared that they were going to kick me out, because at that point I was, you know, a danger or not safe to be in the hospital and a liability. I fell several times, and just told them, you know, just stressed out. I'm just panicked. Like I always made it into like I was having a panic attack or something, because I was so worried that they were going to kick me out and tell me I couldn't be with her because I was unsafe, unstable. So yeah, little side note, I didn't want y'all to forget that I still can't walk. Anyways, well, she remains lethargic, not really wanting to wake up, not wanting to feed. I have to set an alarm on my phone for every 3 hours to make sure I'm feeding, because if not, she would completely sleep through it, which is crazy ridiculous. Kids don't sleep through feedings. They wake you up because they're hungry, right? My oldest daughter, who is 16 months old at this time and never been away from me in her entire life, is now been with my mom, but is now in complete blown hysterics over the fact that mom is gone, and she didn't know where I was and wasn't old enough to understand what was going on. First time she had ever slept at someone else's house. Of course she was with Mimi, but it was really, really hard. Especially, I felt guilt, like I was choosing one child over the other. I know that I was doing the right thing because I know Laney needed me more, but it broke my heart. And having to hear her cry for me over the phone. Sorry. It was really hard.